Okay, we're going to give everyone a minute more and then we're going to get started. Okay, are we ready to go?
Let's go.
All right, wonderful. So glad so many people could join us today. We're very excited about this. NCCER for a long time has wanted to help our network find out about grant information and be able to access those grants and understand what it means to be grant ready, to be grant eligible, and all kinds of wonderful things. We were going to actually hire for this position until we came upon this amazing firm, Grants Plus, that actually offers so many services, and we have partnered with them. And so they are this year and into 2023 going to be helping out our network, going through a series of webinars, making sure on our website that the grants that are available are up to date. For a lot of you understanding that we spent time with them and they interviewed some of the people in our network so they could really look and define what types of grants are applicable to our industry and specifically to our network. So I am very excited that Matt Carter is going to get us started with this and help each month give more and more information and even coaching sessions with many of you to help all of us be better at the grant process, understand it, and be able to get those grants. So thank you again for joining us. One of the things I didn't do is introduce myself as Jennifer Wilkerson, VP of Innovation and Advancement with NCCER. So again, let's turn it over to you, Matt.
All right, thank you very much. And I appreciate the warm intro there. And we are really excited to work with you and with NCCER. It looks like we've still got a couple people joining us, but we will move on here to be fair to everybody's time. So Jennifer actually stole a little bit of my thunder here talking about our partnership. You know, we do have 4 components to it. We'll talk about that in a minute, but first a little bit about Grants Plus and about me. So beyond Jennifer's recommendation, know why maybe you should listen to what we're talking about here today. So Grants Plus, we are a national grant seeking firm that has clients all over the country. We are sort of still based in Cleveland, but we have staff and clients everywhere now. And we are really the leading and one of the first firms to focus solely on grants. Most fundraisers are focused on not grants, and we are focused on grants. And we'll talk about why in a moment. But you can see on the slide here, we have, since we were founded in 2007, have raised 230 million in grants. I think actually as of this morning, we had one come in, so we're at closer to 240. We're obviously very proud of that because we are helping a lot of people carry out a lot of great missions. And that's one of the reasons why I'm excited to be here is because in talking with a lot of the people that NCCER works with, I know you're all doing great work and helping to literally build our country, much less, get people in great jobs, et cetera, et cetera. I'll talk about all of that in a minute. So I personally have spent 25 years in the nonprofit sector. I actually started out with a brand new college degree as an advocate in the nonprofit sector in DC. Did that for 5 years, left and don't ever want to go back, and have been doing fundraising pretty much ever since then. I've been a development director. I have done, you name it, from, carrying tables around for events to meeting with banks. I've done it all. I prefer to meet with banks versus carrying tables around, which is why I'm in grants. In the past 12 years, I've spent focused solely on grant funding, and it's been great because one of the things I want to talk about in a little bit is that grant funding is fundraising on easy mode, because you know that whoever you're talking to is already in the business of giving away money. So I absolutely love doing this. I love working with Grants Plus. I'm a senior advisor there, so I get to teach people about grant seeking all over the country, and have clients doing all sorts of work from colleges to tiny little human service organizations, all of whom are kind of helping to make their mark on the world. And I love that I get to help them with that. So that's enough about me. A little more about our partnership. Obviously, we want to help NCCER's partners establish new revenue sources to meet growing demand. We've heard from you, I've talked to a few of you, and we surveyed many of you that there is demand out there that you're not going to be able to meet with your current funding. So happy to be part of that. And as Jennifer said, there's a few things going on here. So we have this monthly webinar series that's going to go on through February, where if you go through all of those, you will be a great grant seeker at the end, or at the very least be far more comfortable looking for grants. We also have these pre-vetted funding opportunities, and I'll show you our resource page that we've set up, where we have a series of funding opportunities that we're going to keep adding to that pretty much are good to go for a lot of you. So these are opportunities for you to get funding for your associations, for your organizations. We're also offering one-on-one coaching sessions. And I love doing these personally, because these are oftentimes when you're dealing with fundraising, there's one little bump you've got to get over. There's one little problem or one thing you haven't thought of or one thing you've never found a good answer to. And these are a great opportunity for you to just have a one-on-one session with me or one of our other senior grants experts to talk about, where you might be running into troubles, or bounce ideas off of us, or do a sanity check. They're great. They're a half hour. I'll show you how to sign up for those later on. And then we also are offering grant seeking guides. And these are just great downloadables, which again, I will show you how to get to those. That are just a nice one-page downloadable that will help you through a lot of the things we're going to talk about. They're a good reference to have in front of you. So with all of that, a few ground rules for today that I'm seeing a couple people may have unwittingly broken already. Questions anytime. Yeah, see on the chat, I did say February 2022. I'm not going back in time. They go through February 2023. Thank you. So ask questions at any time, but please use the Q&A feature, not the chat, although I know Heather's monitoring the chat. So if you've got something in there, that's fine. And I have been in a lot of these trainings where people have good side conversations in the chat. So don't be afraid, but if you want to make sure that it's a question that we address, please use the Q&A feature. So that's our big ground rule. And our objectives for today are that you have just sort of a basic understanding of why grants matter and why we're here. So understanding the motivations of different kinds of grant makers, and that is broadly government grant programs versus private funders or foundations. Understanding the differences between government and private grants. Understanding why funders might be interested in you. From what I've heard from talking with some of you is you're all doing very fundable work. And then knowing how to use the grant resource page that we're putting together. So unless anyone has any objections, and if you do, I can't hear them anyway, let's get started. So first things first, I want to launch a quick poll, and we have 60 participants. So I'm going to give us maybe 45 seconds of awkward silence, and that is not the correct poll. Let's start with the correct poll. Okay. So we're going to have a few seconds of awkward silence while you read this, but I would like to get a sense of the room and your experience with grants. I'm going to hum the Jeopardy theme in my head, but we'll save all of you from hearing it. Oh, we do not have a clear winner. All right, about half of you are in. I'm going to give this 10 more seconds. Okay. Oh, people are still answering. All right, 2 more seconds. Okay, so let's look at our results here. So we don't really have a clear winner, but we are on the side of not having applied for a lot of grants before. And that's good. For those of you who have applied and gotten funding, there's still going to be some good stuff in here for you, especially using the resource page and some of our best practice approach to getting grants. But for those of you who have not thought about applying before or who have looked into it and not done it, I hope that today you've got a little bit of a grounding and are interested in coming back to the rest of this series to kind of get your feet under you and realize that you have great opportunities to be successful in getting grants. So let me stop sharing and move onwards here. So why are we focusing on grants? And if I'm looking down, my notes are down there, so forgive me. Partly because based on what I've learned from you in interviews and in surveys is you're already doing a pretty good job with individuals and events and businesses. Maybe not as well as you'd like to be, but you guys have a handle on that, it seems. But the main thing about grants is that because they're a huge amount of giving. So hot off the presses, every year there's a Giving USA research study that is done by Purdue University or University of Indiana and a couple other big researchers. And last year, so 2021, foundation giving, so we're not talking about government, foundation grants were 19% of all giving, and that is $91 billion. So we care about grants because there's $91 billion available in grants last year, and that's just private. We're not talking about government. Government, of course, is not easy to get a single number on that, but I'm fairly certain that is in the high billions to maybe the trillions, very low trillion. So these represent a lot of giving. Individuals are 67%. You know, when you're thinking about giving, that is usually, you know, the person writing their $25 check to the zoo. But grants are 20% of giving roughly. The other thing to keep in mind as we're looking at economic news right now, like we need more bad news, is that grants are counter-cyclical. So when the economy tanks, people freak out, or gas is $5 a gallon and food is very expensive, people kind of pull back on their giving. Grantors don't. In fact, during the height of COVID, so in 2020, when everyone was panicking, foundation giving actually went up 17% that year, which is, I think, the biggest, if not the biggest one-time increase in inflation adjusted in at least real money. Because they also did the same thing during the economic crisis of 2008. So basically, when things get bad out there, grant makers often step up, and especially for people doing things like you do, where you're helping people launch careers, you're helping people stay up to date in their jobs, you're helping. You've got this very, very strong impact that helps our economy and helps the country. You've got an easy sell on we need funding right now if things go bad. Maybe this is all wasted breath and the economy is going to recover and we'll be fine. But just know that one of the things about grants is that they are counter-cyclical. So why do funders make grants? The really, really short answer on this is because they have to. So private foundations, the names that you hear, you know, the Gates Foundation down to the Jim and Jane Smith Foundation in your town, the entire reason they exist is to make grants to further their mission. That's it. That's why they're there. They have some mission, which can be, we'll talk about whether it is broad or focused, but that's why they're there. They have a mission. They want to give away money to make things happen towards that mission. And that's because they want to create some change in the world. And again, in a minute, we'll talk about that can be big change or little change, but they are there to give out money to create some change in the world. They have to do that. You guys create change in the world. You find funders who like the change that you're making, you connect with them, you get funding. Thank you, I'm done now. It's pretty much that simple. It's a little more complex than that. But essentially, they're out there to give money to create change. You guys are creating change in this world. That is the real simple version of this. The other thing is that private foundations have to give 5% of their total assets every year. So not only are they in the business of doing this, they are legally obligated to give away money. In the US, if you're a private foundation, 5% of your corpus has to go towards advancing your mission every year. They have to give it away, be the one that they're giving it away to. Government programs, very similarly. They're there because there is some policy change or some change in the country that the state, local, or federal government wanted to happen. Generally, they're there to benefit either all of us as the public or a specific group of the public. There is some policy goal usually involved. Usually it's not just, hey, we want to make sure people have money. Although with the ARPA funding that just went out in the past year, a lot of that was not the most directed funding in the world. And again, because they have to, because Congress will say you have X dollars to give out this fiscal year, you have to give them out. So again, Funders have to give this money out, be the one they're giving it to. So I'm talking about public versus private here, and I want to get that out of the way because everything we're going to talk about is applicable to both, but there are definitely some differences between the two. So first of all, in funding scope. So what are they willing to fund? So I say private grants are a little squishier. They'll definitely have an interest. Private funders will definitely have a mission, and sometimes it's really broad, especially with a community foundation. It can just be to improve the communities we serve, or we see this with corporate foundations, to make life better where our associates work, something like that. Sometimes it can be super hyper specific. Like this is barely changed from a funder that I know, where they are hyper focused on making sure that one city's students graduate. That's it. That's all they care about. If your work does that, and some of your work does do that, I think, that fits. If it doesn't, you have no chance with them. So we'll talk about that in our next month's program about evaluating. But the scope of what they're going to do and the scope of what they support is usually a little more squishy. Then we have got our friends over in government. So government almost always has a very specific focus. For any of you who ever applied for a government grant, you will know that it is, usually, occasionally will even tell you the exact activities you have to do. So it won't just be to fund operations for training sites. It will be to provide welding training in these 12 states to help something happen. It's usually very focused. And even when it's not super focused, it still is generally very specific. And we'll get to what's allowable and not allowable in government grants in a minute. So the other difference is size. So private grants from foundations and corporations vary a lot. There are some foundations out there that make like $500 grants, and I'm pretty sure it costs them $400 to make that $500 grant. So I'm not positive why they do that, but they do. Generally, with a private funder, you're looking at tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands. For the very top percent, you're looking at millions. Also, multi-year grants are really rare from private funders. We'll talk about that in a minute too. Government funders, we're generally talking in the hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars, usually in the hundreds of thousands, and they're usually multi-year. Most government grants, especially ones that you guys are going to look at, are in usually the 2 to 3 year, if not longer range. Some of those exceptions are, arts grants, like NEA grants are, in the tens of thousands. That's not what you're going to be looking at. Which leads us to our good friend complexity. So remember, government grants, you get a whole lot more money generally. So for private funders, for private foundations and private grant programs, there's a lot of variation. Some want a one-pager, some want 20 pages, but often they're pretty simple, especially when compared to government. Most of them are online now, again, except for very small funders. The John and Jane Smith Family Foundation may still be a paper application. Most are online. And the reporting requirements, except for some of the larger funders, are usually pretty flexible. So I know one of the things that came up in the interviews in the survey is some concern around reporting on grants and tracking. And for private funders, it's fairly squishy. Not for all, but as long as you're able to show them that you spent their money the way that you said you were going to, and you are producing the results that you said you were going to, you're usually pretty okay for private funders. Contrasting with the complexity of our friends in government grants. And I would say this is only federal, but some of the worst grants I've ever applied for have been county level grants. So they're often very complicated. They often require hard data. They are usually online. If you've applied for a federal grant lately, it's not just online, but online through several systems. Again, remember, they make much larger grants. This is all worth it because you get hundreds of thousands to millions. You're not going to go through this for a federal program and get $500. The other thing is that reporting is usually fairly complex, but the nice part is with a federal grant, you're going to know exactly what you have to report on ahead of time. The other thing to note is most federal and many state grants are reimbursements. So you're not getting the money ahead of time. You're doing quarterly financial reporting. You're showing, here's how we spent the money, here's what we did. You then get reimbursed for that expenditure, which of course is not necessarily fair for smaller organizations who sometimes can't even float that amount but that's the reality. So definitely the reporting is a little more complicated, but again, you know what you're getting into just by reading the RFP. So related to all of this is flexibility. So again, with private funders, they are very flexible often about what you can spend on. They generally want to fund a program, which we'll talk about. And generally, as long as you are advancing that program, what you spend the money on is okay. Again, there's some funders, we find transportation for some reason. And for those of you who are working with schools, you know transportation is major. There's a lot of funders that will not fund transportation, and I don't know why. Sometimes food too. If you want to have students, they're coming in after school, they're coming to your program, you want to feed them. A lot of private funders don't like that. Again, I don't know why. The other thing to look out for in private grant applications is that indirect expenses are not always allowed. So those are your administrative expenses, your overhead, although I hate using that word because everything in there is crucial to what you do. This is our executive director's salary, the insurance, the lawyers, whatever. Sometimes are allowed, sometimes are not allowed. Often they're not explicit about it. When we talk about budgeting, we'll talk about how you address that. But just know that that's out there. So government grant programs, again, a double-edged sword, are often extremely specific about what a specific program will support. So when you're looking at a request for proposals, there's often a very clear list of what you can spend the money on. Sometimes it's very, very specific. And often you have to do very specific activities within that too. So not only do you know that you can only pay for a licensed somebody or another, they're going to teach 5 classes a week based on their licensure, whatever that is. The other thing is that your indirects with government grants, especially with federal, often with state, are almost always allowed and specified. So for those of you who've got a bunch of federal grants, you may have your own negotiated indirect rate, which you have negotiated with the federal government. That means every grant you get, X% just goes to your bottom line. It's general operating, essentially. You can use it for heat, light, toilet paper, all that fun stuff. If you don't have that agreement, often, and I'm going to say 9.9 times out of 10, there will be within the grant program, we'll say up to 10%. There'll be a de minimis, everybody gets 10% overhead. So again, that's nice because that is just that's your administrative costs. That's things that you're going to incur anyway. At least governments generally recognize that that you need that money to do your programs. So that's kind of the overview. Those are the differences. Everything we talk about is applicable to both, but they're not the same. There are, again, government, you got a lot of work and a lot of money. Private, less work, less money. If I'm going to take it down to one sentence. So let's talk about what grant makers fund. So again, with federal, you're going to know exactly what they're going to fund. You look at the program, it's going to tell you exactly what they'll pay for. But you don't have that luxury with private. So let's talk about the spectrum of fundability with private grant makers. And again, most of what you're doing is on the end of the spectrum that's very fundable. So anything that you are already doing that you can already show is successful, that is already creating the change that funder wants, that's an easy sell for a private funder. Also, new programs that follow best practices that you can say, hey, we want to go to an augmented reality training system. Here's 5 studies showing how it works, and here's where it worked in Arizona. We want to import that into our state. Stuff like that, very fundable. Then you've got kind of this middle ground. So that middle ground is pilot programs. And especially when you're new to a funder, if you can't show them that you think it's going to be successful, if your project is, we think this will work, but we've got to pilot it to find out, that's a hard sell sometimes. For government, that's not a hard sell. Some government grants specifically want to pilot things or launch things or test things or turn research into action. For private funders, that's a hard sell. Operating costs, once you've been with a funder for 5 years, then maybe you can get an operating grant. Till then, it's almost always programs. We'll talk about why in a minute. Capital grants can be really tough to get from private funders. Because most of them don't have millions of dollars for that. and B, because most of the time they want that to be, again, once you've gotten 5 program grants from them, maybe they'll talk to you about capital. That's not true for all. There's a few that actually exist for capital, but by and large, the 95% is hard to get capital out of, but not impossible. Events and advocacy are 2 other things. 99% of funders don't want you to use their money for advocacy. 1%, not even, 1/2 of 1% of funders want you to use their money only for advocacy. By and large, though, events and advocacy, very hard to fund. Things that are almost impossible to get out of private funders is anything you've already spent. If you've already spent the money, they don't want to fund it. They don't care about debt reduction. It's almost impossible to get endowment money. Political support for overtly political activities, not advocacy. Again, private funders not going to touch that. And unless you're running a scholarship program, grants to individuals, again, not a thing that private funders do. So just know, most of you, from what I've heard from your work, are all the way over on this successful programs and new programs that follow best practices and are fundable. So why is there such an emphasis on programs with private funders, especially for your first or third grant from that funder? It really comes down to it being safer. I mean, I wish it wasn't this way. I wish funders were more open to risk, because there's a lot of problems going on that can be solved through risky things instead of doing what we keep doing. But a lot of private funders want that safe investment. The other thing is that when they stick to only funding programming, they've got this nice limited scope. We're going to do X, Y, and Z. You do X, Y, and Z. It works or it doesn't work. The funder's happy or unhappy. It's much more cut and dried and easier for them to figure out if they were successful and if you were successful. There's also a limited timeline. I mentioned it's hard to get multi-year grants out of private funders. Usually they want to fund you for a year so that if it doesn't work, they don't fund you next year. They've cut their losses. Again, very risk-averse philosophy. The other thing is that you have clear reporting generally with a program. So it's not, you're not trying to make some change in the whole world. It's, we are going to do a schools connection program where we work with 100 kids. 50 of those are going to move on to work in our post-grad program. 15 are going to end up with jobs in a craft. It's simple. You report on that. It happened or it didn't happen. And again, kind of a risk-averse thing. So there's limited trust with that. What this all comes down to, especially if this is, one of your first few grants or your first time working with a funder, is there's limited trust required. And that's not a great situation. Again, I wish it wasn't this way, but the reality is there's far more need than there is funding. Funders come at you suspicious to start with, and there's not that trust gained. But there's some ways to game the system that we're going to talk about. But before we do that, I want to launch another poll if I can. Well, not do that. There we go. Could not make it come up on my screen. I apologize. So let's talk about funder relationships. And I'm gonna launch this again about 45 seconds here. And I want to get a sense of how many of you are in any practice of talking with funders before you submit to them asking for money. We so far have a very clear winner. All right, only 47% of you have voted, but at this point, I'm not sure the rest of you can change the outcome. I'm gonna give this 5 more seconds. Yeah, that outcome is not changing. Okay, let's share. So 84% of you never talk to a grant maker before submitting a grant. This is not a best practice. However, I bet 90% of nonprofits never talk to a grant maker before submitting a proposal. So you are very much in the mainstream, and I'm going to try and talk you out of that. So for the 10% of you that occasionally do talk to grant makers, good. For those of you who often or always do it, good. You are on the right track. That is the best practice. Let's move on and talk about this. So one of the things that has developed as a best practice in grant seeking, both from our end as people who are seeking grants and from the funders' end of people who are giving grants, is having a major gift approach. So for those of you who've done any fundraising, a major gifts approach is when you're talking to your large donors. You're talking to somebody who you want to give you $100,000 and how you're going to go about doing that. You would not just throw a letter in the mail and say, "Dear Matt Carter, can you please send us $100,000? We do great work." You would never do that for an individual. Don't do that for a funder. And this actually even applies to government, where you think it would be a little more like that. But you can still develop relationships within government agencies and funders. So let's look at this. Most people practice what I call the slot machine model of grant seeking. I get my chit, I write a proposal, I put it in the machine, maybe some money comes out, maybe money doesn't. Oh well. Well, the frustrating thing about this for those of us that teach best practices is this does work sometime, but it's still not a best practice. The funding has no relationship. There's no, you cannot depend on it. There's no long-term potential there. You don't know if the funder likes you. You don't know if they accidentally funded you. You don't know if they gave away 100 grants and you were number 99 in the pile. You have no idea. It is strictly transactional. It's sometimes successful. Like I said, frustrating for those of us teaching best practice, because you could do this your entire career and still raise money, but not as much as you could other ways. It is never dependable. You never have any idea where you stand with the funder. Like I said, they could have given away 100 grants and you could have been 100 this year. And next year, one better organization comes in, you're off the list. You have no idea if that's going to happen. The other thing is, even if none of this other stuff matters, thinking only of yourself, it's time consuming. You have to spend time to write a grant that you have no idea if it's going to get funded or not. And that drives me nuts. There are some funders that will not talk to you, and I hate to apply to them because I feel like I am potentially wasting hours of my time doing it when there's other stuff out there that we could be doing. So again, this is a very common model. This is not a good model. So let's talk about this major gifts model. And you'll see we've turned that straight line into a cycle. And if we all had cool 3D monitors, we could show how this goes through time, and is actually it's a giant spiral that just goes on over the years. But this is kind of 1 year cycle where you go through and you strategize. Here are our programs that we'd like to get funding for. These are the ones that we think are going to be friendly towards grant funders. These are the ones that we think are going to be good. We then identify the funders that we're going to go to, and we come up with a list. It's not just, hey, we found this one funder, okay, let's now apply. Okay, we found another funder, now let's go apply. It's that we've identified maybe 10 potential funders, and then we can see among them who's going to give us the largest amount of money, who's got the next deadline, who's the most open to talk to, and make intelligent decisions about how we approach those funders. Then we cultivate the funder. That's a fancy fundraising word for saying we talk to them. We go and we call up the funder, we email the funder, and we say, hey, you know, my name is Matt Carter. I'm running this great program in Arizona where we are helping high school kids who don't necessarily want to go to college get into the crafts. Here's what we do. We think it's really neat. And we think that it advances your mission of helping every kid graduate into a job that pays a living wage. 2-minute conversation, you've probably convinced them to fund you. So you get feedback on that. Again, we'll talk about all that at a later webinar. But you've just had a conversation, you know that the funder is at least interested in you. Then you go to the ask. So we're halfway through the clock here. We started at midnight. It's 6 o'clock before we get to the ask. Then either we get the grant and we stay on this line, or we don't get the grant and we move off. But we get the grant, we do the funded work, we keep that funder in the loop with what's happening. We don't only talk to them when we're looking for money. If you have a friend that you only talks to you when they need something from you, they're not going to be your friend for a long time. We are trying to get these funders to be a friend for a long time. So we talk to them about what's going on, and then we go through all of this again. We say, okay, are we going to go back to this funder again next year? Did we succeed? Were they happy with us? Is this still a good program for what they're funding? Let me talk to them, make sure they want to know that they want a renewal request from us, that they know that we're planning to renew. We go through it all again. If you do this well, you're going to be with this funder for 20 years, and you're going to go through this cycle over and over and over. So the key thing is that this is relationship based. This is a real human relationship. It is dependable. It is you and another human being talking to each other about work that you're doing. The work that you do and the work that they want to fund that creates the change that they want in the world, that they legally have to fund. So you're talking with another person. You're not just throwing paper into a machine. It's two-way communication. You hear back from them. Yeah, well, what you're doing with the school sounds really good, but we don't care about what happens after that. We're only concerned about the school transition, not the transition to the job. Okay, great. We're doing a ton of work with schools. We'll focus on that for our proposal. Done. There's room for that long-term strategy. Like I talked about, you can start small with this funder and keep working your way through that spiral. And over the years, develop a really strong relationship and hopefully keep that funding again and again over years. It's far more dependable. You know where you stand. If you're doing your stewardship, if you're talking with the funder, you're hearing, oh, that sounds great, or oh, we were hoping that you were able to do more. You know that either they're going to fund you or they're not. It is a much more dependable approach. Again, based on that, saves you time and effort. If you have this talk over in cultivation in the dark blue at 5 o'clock, and they say, that sounds really neat, but I don't think we're going to fund it, you don't have to send in a proposal now. The second best outcome, other than yes, we want to fund you, is no, we don't want to fund you right now. Please don't send in a proposal, because you've saved time and you can go talk to some other funder that might want to actually fund you. So if nothing else, you have saved time and effort. So let's flip this around, and I didn't see anything pop up on the Q&A. Again, if you would like to ask questions at any point, just use the Q&A. But we've talked a lot about, why grant makers matter to you. But let's talk for a minute about why you matter to grant makers, and I promise you that you do. So the first thing is that you are all working in some real, I call it key topic areas. You're working in some hot areas right now. A lot of funders care about what you're doing. There's a lot of emphasis on, people being left behind in society. There's a lot of emphasis on having jobs, fair wages for fair work, all of that. And you're providing that. So your work impacts a lot of topic areas that funders care about. Sustainable jobs, sustainable wages are a big thing right now. You're helping with that. Careers that I don't have to go into I got 3 teenagers, so I think about this all the time. Careers that don't require hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt to go start, because you went to a liberal arts college and got a poli-sci degree. Luckily, I did that on the cheap in the 90s. But careers that get people set up where they don't have to spend, they don't have to start hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. Expanding career options through certification. So again, even for people who are already doing the work, that you're able to help people get certified and, again, get certified, get more money, advance in their job, but still, that is the thing funders care about right now. Funders always care about economic development. Funders always care about building our communities. You are literally building our communities. Oftentimes, a lot of what you're doing, I think, is tangential to economic development. But again, you are building our communities. When you're talking about all this with funders, the focus is on all of these. It should be on the impact that you're having on your community. So we are creating, by doing what we do, we are creating all of these great changes in our community. And I see a question here, are there resources? Yes, we will talk about resources with lists of who has funded what. We'll touch that a little bit at the end today, but we'll also talk about that in the next webinar about how to match your programs with funders. So beyond key topic areas, all of you are also dealing with, again, what I'm calling key populations that funders care about right now. So your work impacts populations funders want to see succeed. So youth transition to careers is a huge thing amongst funders right now. Again, there's this fear of either having to start a career massively in debt for college or, ending up in a permanent minimum wage job. You're helping youth not do that. Adults seeking sustainable employment. Again, you're doing certifications, you're doing training, you are helping adults seek better employment that they can actually, pay for their family's needs out of. The other thing is a lot of you are working with populations not traditionally represented in the crafts. Again, a lot of funders care about that. Not having, I keep raising my hand for these, not having middle-aged white guys working. We all got to work too, but making sure that you've got populations that are not traditionally represented. Again, focusing on the impact you have on these lives when you're talking to funders. So not talking about necessarily the work you do, but here's the impact our work has. Moms are able to work 45 hours a week and actually pay for their kids and be sustainable and not be shuffling through 3 jobs. Any of that, being able to talk about that is huge, and you all can. So that is all. That's my preaching of why funders should care about you, and they will. So you should care about funders. Funders should care about you. This leads us into our next section. How do we make this all match? So I'm going to unshare my screen here, and we're going to show off the resource page that we are building and maintaining between Grants Plus and NCCER. And of course, I have fired. Oh, you're going to see my Zoom launch because that's on the same. Okay. All right. For those of you on camera, nod. We can see the lovely NCCER logo. Okay. So we're seeing this right now. So I think by being at this webinar, you all have already landed on this page to sign up for it. If not, we will get you the URL and the password. But NCCER and Grants Plus are maintaining this for this is the 4 main parts. So first and foremost, which I'm going to get to last, is the grant opportunities, because those are going to take a minute to show off. So these are the pre-vetted opportunities I was talking about, where a lot of them are going to apply to the work you're doing. Also, the full webinar schedule. So I think some of you may have registered this way. You can register as a short description. You can register for any or all of these on the page. Coaching sessions, again, I talked about those in the beginning. For those of you who want to talk to one of our senior grants experts for a 30-minute session about kind of any of these topics, or any challenges you have, because again, we know so many times it's just this small bump that's stopping you, and just talking to somebody about it can be a huge help and help you get grants. So scheduling those can be done right here. Very sophisticated. You go to the calendar, it loads, you pick a time, and we will approve you, and you'll get an email. And I think I have to go back now. Yep. So that is there. Then the last thing is the last thing I talked about, those grant seeking guides. So I love, and I've been doing this for 12 years. I still have my own, not as pretty as this go, no go guide here for whether you should go for an opportunity, and sometimes run through it with people that we work with. But there's just some really great info on here. It's all easy. It's all, one page. You can read it while you're bored on hold if you need to. And it will really help you with all these specific aspects of your grant seeking. So all of that's exciting, but what's really exciting, and I think what everyone's here for, is these grant opportunities. So as you can see, we've got these broken, we've done the best we can to kind of break them into broad areas. So, areas where you can start to look with a decent sense of what might apply to you. So let's go with job training for specific populations or special populations, because that's what I just talked about. So you're looking at a specific group, subgroup, whatever that is. So you'll see as you click on that, we then have this full list of the funders that we found that are for special populations. So you'll go through, you'll see there's a the title and then a really brief write-up. Just kind of quickly scroll through these and see what's interesting, what's out there. I don't know who the High Stand Family Foundation is, so we're going to click on them because it'll be a fun adventure for all of us. So this is one of the funders that we found. If you click on them, you'll get a little more info about them. So you can see what their focus area is. Some of these funders are in multiple focus areas on here. What the range is, so they're generally funding up to $50,000. Geographic focus, they care about the Midwest. They're a private funder. Eligibility for almost all of these is going to be you are a 501c3 or a government entity, although for some of the government ones that's not true. And then just a brief summary. So it talks about what the foundation cares about here. So if all of this looks like it might be you, you can click on the Learn More and be taken to their website. I'm glad this is not a loud and annoying one. And then dig a little more within what they're doing and see where there's a match for you. And again, as we go through these webinars, we'll talk more. The July webinar is specifically talking about evaluating funders for what you're doing. So a little more of how to put this into use. But even now, I think a lot of you will be able to browse through and find some good information and potential leads looking at these funders. And I am going to, was there another Q&A? Nope. Okay. Oh, and Heather, thank you. I see in the chat you put up the login for anybody who needs that. So yeah, that is what's there. Let me go back to look at. I want to make sure I showcase the new, and I didn't look as if there's anything there because it's brand new. But one of the things that we're doing through this partnership is, if we find new grants, we're not just going to dump them in one of these. These categories, the apprenticeships, all these categories here are what exist right now, and we're going to add to them. But as we are adding things over the next 9 months, I guess 8.5 months, they will first come up in this new. So you fairly regularly want to check into this page and click on the new ones and see what's new and interesting out there. Like we saw the women in apprenticeships one in the last one, so that's already there, but it's also in the new. So even if you've already looked through that category, you think you've looked at what you need, make sure you check back on the new. The other fun thing is, because federal grants often have about a 6-week application period, we're going to make sure we update this weekly. So again, if you want to be very thorough, just leave this tab open somewhere and click on new every once in a while, and see if there's some interesting stuff that has come up for what you do. So let me switch back here. And again, just any questions on that? There's any questions on that, feel free to ask. So that's kind of the basics. That is the basics of NCCER and Grants Plus's partnership. That's the basics of what we're making available on that page. Again, if there's questions, feel free to pop them into the Q&A. Other than that, let's talk about what's next. So your homework is to go explore that resource page, find some funding for yourself. There's some really interesting stuff out there. I don't want to make you watch me browse a website, but there's, I don't know, 50 to 60 some funders on there right now, and we're going to keep adding to that. So explore that. If you haven't already, register for the next webinar. And I dropped a couple hints on that. That is going to be about how do you evaluate grant opportunities for your organization. So to that first question about, are there resources out there that show what grant makers fund? Yes, I will talk about, hopefully they have a nice website, and hopefully the nice website has a list of grants they've made recently. And I suspect the subtext of that question is that is a very important thing to know, because it absolutely is. Often smaller funders don't have a website, and all we have to go on is who they funded in the past. So that by itself gives you, I don't know, let's say 51% of the knowledge you need to figure out if you should apply to a funder or not. If they're funding organizations that are like you, then you should probably talk to them. So we'll talk about doing that. But this will be about, again, how do you know an opportunity is good for what you do? So we'll talk about some ways to do that quickly and efficiently. Kind of a flow chart. Check this, then check that, then check that. If all these check out, then go here. But that will help you evaluate both the funders that we've got on the page already and funders you come across in the wild. I would say also, if you have any specific questions or concerns, feel free to sign up for a coaching session. The July ones are open right now. As we're flipping monthly, so the August ones will become open after July 1st. Again, if you've got a question, sign up for one of those sessions. Other than that, I think we are good. So any other questions? I'm looking at participants to see if anybody's going to hand up. Nope. All right. Oh wait, we do have Scott. Scott, I'm going to try the allow you to talk and see if this works. Scott, can you hear me? Oh, Scott needs to unmute.
Now?
Yes. Hi.
That's
help. A good idea. Got you. Thank you.
I'm on the website trying to register for webinars. It says there are no scheduled webinars, so I'm trying to register for that July 20th webinar.
Really? All right. This is thrilling television. I'm going there live right now that you guys can't see.
It looks like it's thinking, like it's trying to
I was
load
okay.
something, but I'm not getting anything.
Try hitting again, because I was just able to get there. So you should be able to see my screen now. What came up? So if you go for July 20, register. You should be seeing that. If not,
Yeah. When I hit I'm on the Grants Plus webinars page. When I hit the register for webinars, it just pops up. There are no scheduled webinars at this time.
oh, okay. So you have to go, if you go back into the chat and go to the link that Heather sent,
Mm-hmm.
if you go there, you should be able to get that. So using that grantsplus.com/private pages and then the password NCCER grants 86. I will say in the
Okay.
spirit of it, did that work?
No, I was already signed in. So
Oh, okay.
Yep. I'm
Excellent.
trying it again as we speak here.
All right. Well, we will also
I
look on
won't
the
hold
back
up
end.
the show. I won't hold up the show. You're good. You're good.
Well, thank you, Scott, and we'll look on the back end, see if there's anything not quite working there, and fix it. But it should work for you. And we'll also we'll send out the recording of this this webinar, post it up on there, and you know, make sure if there's anything you guys need to know to get to the next one, to sign up for the next one, we will make sure that gets to you. So I'm seeing knowledge from Jennifer and Heather, so we're good.
Yeah, and I tried it. I mean, I got into, so I don't know. Hopefully it's easy to get into.
I never want to tell somebody to talk to their IT provider, but you might have to talk to your IT people. Sorry. All right. Well, with no other questions popping up here, I think everybody gets 6 minutes of their life back. Thank you all for joining us. I'm looking forward to seeing you all on our next webinar on July 20th. Jennifer, I don't know if you've got anything you'd like to add.
No, just appreciate you doing this. We're really excited. We hope people utilize this service. It's something that NCCER wanted to offer to our network to ensure that you have access, again, to grants that are applicable, because we've spoken to some people and it takes a lot of time just to find and scan through grants and figure out what's applicable. And then is it worth it? Like, what do I have to do to get this type of grant? And what's the maintenance I have to do? And what do I have to turn in? So we just really think that Grants Plus does a great job at cutting through some of the red tape that might be attached that may have kept you from going for grants in the past. So please use the services.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. We will. I'll see some of you for coaching sessions already. You're already signed up, and we'll see all of you in July.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.